We're going to start this puppy up. Clear, prop.
And welcome back to Tip of the Week. This week is the final installment of the step-by-step building of the Sonex tail kit. By this time, you are an expert at the knowledge, techniques, and tools needed to put this kit together. The point of all of this is so that you can decide whether this is the type of kit you want to get involved with. So, with no further ado, let's get started. Now we're going to assemble the elevator horn and ribs. Now this is a piece of steel. It is pre-drilled. And attached to each of these ears will be the elevator horn. This is at the root rib. And it matches nicely. There's going to be one on each side, and we're basically just going to drill through all of the holes and into the rib. Now there is a left and a right. This is T0704 and this one is the left, and then the right rib is just the mirror complement of it. We set this on the table, and it is important that we have these set up so that there's no twist, and we can ensure that by having a flat table. I'm simply putting them both flat on a table, and we want the bottom edge and the forward edge to be even with the rib itself. So for each rib, we'll keep it even on the bottom, and our table will ensure that, and then we want it even up at the front here. So I'm going to attach one at a time, cleco a couple holes to ensure that it's nice and straight, and then when I attach the second one, I need to make sure this is on the table, because it is important to keep our left elevator and our right elevator wing even, and that's the purpose of having these flat on the table so that we're not twisted one way or the other. So I will drill with my pilot size holes and cleco, do one side and then the other, and then we'll up drill and rivet. Some of the holes are hard to get at because of the obstruction with your drill, and that's where the long drill bit comes in very handy for getting those holes. It's because of the flexibility of the drill bit that you can get around in some tight places. When we're all done drilling, we can then open the holes up to the final rivet size of a number 30 drill bit or 1/8, and then we'll take it apart and deburr and then reassemble and rivet. We have disassembled and deburred and are now ready for riveting. We'll do all the easy ones first, and then we have a few that are going to be a little hard to get at because of the obstruction, and we'll take a look at those. The two rivets I could not get easily were these last two right here, and the reason is that the gun can't get seated properly without bending the stem over or getting a crooked rivet in there. So we're going to use our tool, the wedge, place that over the rivet, and that wedge there allows our rivet gun to get in at a better angle. Perfectly set, and then do the same thing with the one next door. Now, we want to take the left and the right elevator skin and slide them over the corresponding horn. Now, this is sitting upside down, that's so that this will sit flat on the table. And we want to align the front so that they're even. And what we're going to do now is take a measurement from one end to the other and confirm that our length is proper. Now, we want to take a measurement from the edge on this side all the way over to the edge on the other side. Right here. We want to make sure we get the 78 inches specified in our plans. Now, this is important because the width of the elevator has a lot to do with how well it's going to fit to the stabilizer when we match them up with the hinge. Now, if we come up a little short of 78 inches, of course we can slide this out a little bit. And the same with on the other side. If we have more than 78 inches, we can of course push the horn or push the rib in. But if we still have greater than 78 inches, we would need to trim the skin slightly all the way around to make sure we can get exactly 78 inches. On the root end of each of our elevator skins, we want to draw a line a 1/4 inch in from the edge all the way around, and then mark the rivet locations as specified in our plans. We can go ahead then and use our number 40 drill bit and drill the pilot holes. And we're going to do that for both elevator skins. Now we have to prepare our hinge TO708 with the elevator. We're going to start by taking the full-length hinge and pulling out the pin. And then we can separate the two pieces. And we want to cut one of the pieces to the size specified in our plans. After cutting to the proper length, and this can be cut quite easily with your snips, we want to mark the rivet locations. Now this is rather straightforward. I've drawn a center line halfway from the top to the bottom, and then in the center of each loop I've placed a mark, and that's where we're going to drill a number 40 size pilot hole for the entire length. And these are exactly 1 inch apart and centered on the loop. Now we're preparing to install the hinge on our elevator. Our elevator is upside down and it is on top of two supports here. I have a square steel beam. You can use a piece of lumber. The important thing is that it needs to be straight because we're going to be installing the hinge along this edge, and we want to make sure that it is nice and straight because we're going to have it attached to the stabilizer with a hinge pin, and so we want a nice straight reference line. I have one also in the back to hold it up. This is going to be the outside edge of one of the elevators. It's the straight end with the straight cut. And I have a mark 1.5 inches from the end, and that's going to be where the hinge begins. Now if we place our hinge with the loops down, which is really the top side of the elevator, up to that mark, and we go take a look at the other end, we will see that it should line up with the center edge. And we note that it in fact does match with the very corner down here. So that's where we want the hinge to be located lengthwise. And before drilling the hinge, we can place the hinge in place and verify that the mark for the hole that will go into our center rib is aligned properly. We can adjust the mark if necessary to make sure all of those rivets stay in line for the internal flange of the center rib. Now we're back at the outer side, and we have the hinge basically in place of where it is going to be located. This cleco here. If we look at our plans, the bottom of these hoops are supposed to be about 1.5 millimeters up from the surface. So we need to raise this up 1.5 millimeters. Now that's not very much. So I will find an object that is approximately 1.5 millimeters thick. In my case here, it's this steel square that I have. And so the idea is if I place this underneath, that will hold it approximately at the right distance off of the surface. So I'm going to go through and see if I can get the hinge set up for the entire length, and when I'm ready I can drill a hole through my pilot hole and cleco as I go, keeping this distance for the entire length of the hinge. Now we need to repeat this installation of the hinge for the other elevator skin. At this stage, we can now drill out all of the holes to their final rivet size, which would be our number 30 drill bit, or 1/8 inch, and of course replace all of our silver clecos with the copper colored ones. The only holes we don't want to touch are the ones on the inside of each of the elevator skins. We'll save these holes later when we drill the horn that fits inside. So we won't touch any holes around this edge. Once everything's drilled out to its final rivet size, we will then disassemble, deburr everything, reassemble, and rivet. At that stage, we'll line up the two elevator skins and align it with our horn and ribs in the center. We have slid our horn and the two ribs that go with it into the left and right elevator skin. I have this flat on a surface, and we'll take a look at how I have it aligned. But our ultimate goal is to drill into the rib through both of our skins when we have the skins perfectly aligned. We have our ruler because we need to know how far to slide the skins in onto the rib to get the inches that we are after, and to keep everything aligned and not twisted between the left and right side. Notice our creative use of a straight edge. We have the elevator pushed up tight against this entire length with the goal of making sure that the hinge down there is in perfect alignment from one end all the way to the other. So you can come up with any practical way to make sure that the front edge of the elevator is in perfect alignment, and also that it's on a flat surface so that there is no twist in the other direction. We also want to make sure that the distance from one end to the other is the 78 inches in our plans, and we can adjust that by moving the skin in and out from the ribs in the center horn. When we're satisfied with the alignment, we can then drill into our pre-drilled holes into the ribs of the horn. Once that's done, the position will be fixed, and then we can flip it over and drill the other side. You know you've done a pretty good job when you can send a hinge through one end and it matches through to the other side without too much of a difficulty. Our next step is to open those pilot holes to the final rivet size, number 30 drill bit, and then we're going to disassemble and deburr all of the holes, reassemble, and rivet. After drilling out to final size, we've taken it apart. We need to deburr the horn and the skin, both sides, and then we can reassemble and rivet. We are now ready to mate this up to the stabilizer. with the connection being the hinge. Our next step is to cut two hinges, both the same length, and these will actually be the same length as the hinges that are attached to the elevator. These are going to go onto the stabilizer. We also want to cut two of the pins to be just about an inch longer. Later we'll cut these off to final length, but for now an inch longer will allow us to easily insert them and remove them. Now I have brought the elevator and the stabilizer up close to each other, lining them up. Notice that because of the horn on the elevator, I placed my supports under both of them just to hold them off the table a bit so that the horn doesn't get in the way. I'm going to bring them up, and of course we're going to note that they're both the same length from one end to the other, and of course our hinge is already attached to the elevator. We're going to start to affix the hinge to the stabilizer so that it matches. Here's a close-up of where the two come together at the hinge line. Our hinge is going to have the barrels down and is going to end up underneath the flange of the stabilizer. And in fact, the plans show us having the barrel of the hinge, the center of the barrel, even with the edge of the flange. So this is where it will go once we attach it permanently. Now the easiest way to get this set up is to first install the hinge pin between the two halves, and I'll do that now, and we'll do it on both sides. Now, our first step is to make sure that we have the elevator and the stabilizer even. And you can confirm by looking at the other end that it's also even. But if everything came out right, they should be both the same size. Then I'm using my fingers underneath here to push the hinge up and put it into place, just like this, so that my center line of the barrel, or the center of the pin, is even with the edge of the stabilizer. And my fingers are holding up the hinge here. And what I want to do then is to drill with a pilot hole through one of these holes and cleco. Now obviously you want to not drill through your finger, so I'll put a little piece of wood under there while I'm drilling. And then after I cleco, I want to leave the cleco in place and then go down to the other end of the stabilizer and elevator and do the same thing. It's very important that we get at least one cleco at the same time in each of the hinges, and that way it will maintain the spacing of the hinges from left to right perfectly so that we have them positioned properly. I'm going to go ahead and drill one of these holes and cleco. Here we have drilled our first hole in one of the hinges, and down at the other end we have done the same thing. What this means is that both hinges are now spaced properly in relationship to each other so that the elevator can be installed and removed easily without conflict. If these two hinges were off by just a little bit in relationship to each other, we'd have a very hard time getting the elevator on or off. I'm now going to remove the elevator and finish up drilling the hinges, which is going to be much easier with the elevator removed. Now we can put the hinge back in place and cleco it. And we can continue now drilling the rest of it without the elevator in the way, maintaining the proper alignment, center of the barrel to the edge, all the way down. And when we do that to the other side, we can go back and test that our elevator fits just as easily as before. When all of the holes are drilled out, we can then go back and open them up to their final rivet size of 1/8 or a number 30 drill bit. And then we need to disassemble at that point and deburr before reassembling and riveting. We need to, of course, deburr all of our parts before final riveting. And for getting in between the skin and the flange here, I'm just using a stainless steel ruler, and that will knock off any burrs in between. Before attempting to insert your hinge pins into the hinge, you should create a point on the end of the pin. Now you can do this using your Scotch-Brite wheel. Be very careful when doing that, of course, but having a point will make it much easier to get the pins all the way into the hinge. The hinge pins are inserted from the center, going in one direction, and of course one pin going the other direction. Here's one I have started, and it will just push in. It helps to have a second person who can manage the pin pressing in and another person flexing the elevator as necessary to keep the hinge nice and aligned as you push the pin in. Then of course the second one needs to be placed in the other direction. We're not going to put them in all the way now, as we need to be able to remove the elevator soon. For now, we're going to prepare drilling the ends for safety wires to keep the pins from leaving the area. Now, to prevent this pin from vibrating out while in flight, we need to make a very small hole in this last loop that will allow us to insert a cotter pin to prevent the pin from leaving. Now, that also means we need to cut the pin to the proper length so that it's just a little bit shorter than the hinge. After drilling this hole in the end, we can then use a cotter pin. Now this will be after we tap the pin all the way in and past the hole, and that's why your hinge pin has to be not the entire length of the hinge, but short enough so that it gets past the hole. And then our cotter pin will go in, and then we will spread it, and that will prevent the pin from migrating out in that direction. And we have another hole on the outside end in the last loop. So our hinge pin has to be short to fit between the two holes, one at one end and the hole at the other end. Now I have marked the hinge where I want to cut it, and I'm simply using a Dremel type rotary tool with a cutoff wheel on the end. And you want to make sure you're wearing glasses. And it makes it very easy to cut the stainless steel hinge. Now I'm going to put a point on that on my Scotch-Brite wheel. We are going to demonstrate installation of the fiberglass tips. And that concludes our step-by-step segment on building the Sonex tail kit. That very last short segment on installing the fiberglass tips, that is included on our DVD with the same title, available on our website. Keep tuned to our channel for more examples of building various experimental aircraft kits.